What if the most disturbing horror movies were never the famous ones? What if the real nightmares were buried in forgotten catalogs waiting to be rediscovered? Tonight, we are uncovering 15 extremely rare 80s horror films hiding on Tubi. These are not safe choices. These are strange, unsettling, and often overlooked experiences that will stay with you long after they end. Stay with me, because the deeper we go, the darker it gets. Number 15, The Prey, 1983. Deep inside the forest where silence feels unnatural, this film builds its terror slowly. The story follows a group of campers who believe they have escaped civilization only to discover something is watching them from the shadows. What makes this film unusual is its patience. It does not rush. It lingers on nature. It studies isolation. Then it strikes without warning. Production history adds another layer of intrigue. The film was shot years before its release, which caused it to feel strangely out of time even when it finally reached audiences. That delay created an eerie effect because the style feels older than the era it belongs to. Long, quiet stretches replace fast-paced slasher rhythms. When violence arrives, it feels sudden and unsettling. There is also a rawness here that modern horror rarely captures. The forest does not feel like a set. It feels vast and indifferent. The killer is not glamorized. It is something primitive and disturbing. This creates a tone closer to survival horror than typical teen slashers. What you are watching is not just a forgotten film. It is a strange relic from a transitional moment in horror where atmosphere mattered more than shock. And that is exactly why it still works. Number 14, Mountaintop Motel Massacre, 1986. There is something deeply unsettling about a place meant for rest becoming a trap. This film takes that idea and pushes it into nightmare territory. A remote motel run by a woman descending into madness becomes the setting for a series of brutal killings. Guests arrive expecting shelter. Instead, they find themselves locked inside a place where safety no longer exists. What elevates this film beyond its low-budget roots is the central performance. The killer is not just evil. She is fractured. Her descent is tied to religious obsession and psychological collapse, which gives the violence an uncomfortable edge. It is not random. It feels driven by something broken inside her mind. The setting plays a crucial role. The motel is isolated. There is no help coming. Every corridor feels claustrophobic. Every room becomes a potential death trap. The film understands how to use space to build tension without relying on expensive effects. It also reflects a darker side of 80s horror. Beneath the surface, this is a story about isolation and untreated trauma. That emotional undercurrent makes the horror linger longer than expected. It is not just about who survives. It is about what happens when the mind itself becomes the real danger. Number 13, Sweet 16, 1983. At first glance, this feels like a familiar setup. A teenage girl returns to a small town. Boys begin to die. Suspicion spreads quickly, but what makes this film stand out is how it plays with perception. It invites the audience to assume one truth while quietly building toward another. The atmosphere is grounded in small-town tension. Everyone knows each other. Secrets are harder to hide. Yet no one truly understands what is happening. This creates a slow-burning mystery that blends slasher elements with psychological uncertainty. The killings are not just acts of violence. They are clues in a larger puzzle. The film also explores themes of identity and projection. The central character becomes the focus of suspicion, not because of evidence, but because of fear. The town needs someone to blame. That emotional pressure builds throughout the story and adds a layer of unease beyond the murders themselves. What keeps this film memorable is its restraint. It does not rely on constant shock. Instead, it builds tension through suspicion and shifting perspectives. By the time the truth is revealed, the horror feels earned rather than forced. This is not just another slasher. It is a quiet study of paranoia wrapped inside a mystery that refuses to reveal itself too easily. Number 12, The Final Terror, 1983. Before many of its cast became major stars, this film quietly emerged as one of the most atmospheric wilderness horror entries of the decade. A group of park rangers ventures deep into a forest that feels untouched by time. What begins as routine exploration slowly turns into a fight for survival as something unseen begins to stalk them through the trees. Unlike traditional slashers, this film leans heavily on environment. The forest is not just a backdrop, it becomes a living presence. Thick fog, far narrow trails, darkness that seems to swallow sound. Every element contributes to a growing sense of disorientation. The characters are not simply hunted, they are lost in a space that refuses to guide them out. The pacing is deliberate. It allows tension to build gradually instead of relying on constant violence. When attacks occur, they feel sudden and chaotic. This contrast between calm and brutality creates a lingering unease that stays with the viewer. There is also an underlying theme of nature reclaiming control. The deeper the group travels, the more powerless they become. Technology fails, logic breaks down, survival instincts take over. It becomes clear that the real horror is not just the killer, but the realization that they are completely alone. This film stands as a bridge between psychological horror and slasher traditions. It proves that fear does not always need to be loud. Sometimes it waits quietly in the trees. Number 11, American Nightmare, 1983. This film takes a different path into horror by blending urban paranoia with slasher brutality. Set against the backdrop of a chaotic city nightlife, it follows a man searching for his missing sister. What he discovers is a world that feels dangerous even before the violence begins. Every street corner carries tension. Every encounter feels uncertain. The killer here is masked and elusive, which adds a layer of mystery that drives the narrative forward. Unlike rural horror settings, this story thrives on urban unpredictability. Crowded spaces do not provide safety. Instead, they create confusion. The danger can appear from anywhere and vanish just as quickly. The film also reflects the anxieties of its time. There is a sense that society itself is unraveling. Trust becomes difficult. Identity becomes uncertain. The characters move through environments that feel alive but hostile. This transforms the city into a maze where escape is never guaranteed. Stylistically, the film embraces a gritty tone. Lighting is harsh. Scenes feel raw. The violence is sudden and uncomfortable. It avoids glamorizing horror and instead presents it as something intrusive and chaotic. At its core, this is more than a slasher. It is a portrait of fear within modern life. The nightmare is not confined to one location. It spreads across the entire environment, and that makes it far more unsettling. Number 10, Curtains, 1983. Few films capture the unsettling blend of performance and reality quite like this one. Set around a group of actresses competing for a role, it quickly transforms into something far darker. The audition becomes a psychological battlefield where ambition and fear collide. Then the killings begin, and the line between acting and survival disappears. What makes this film stand out is its atmosphere. Snow-covered landscapes replace typical horror settings. The cold environment creates a sense of isolation that amplifies every moment of tension. Silence becomes oppressive. Movement feels exposed. It is a setting that strips away comfort and leaves only vulnerability. The killer is iconic in a quiet way. A simple mask, a haunting presence. The film does not rely on excessive explanation. Instead, it allows mystery to linger, which makes each appearance more disturbing. You are never fully certain who is behind the mask, and that uncertainty drives the suspense forward. There is also a strong psychological layer. The characters are performers, which means deception is part of their identity. This makes trust impossible. Every interaction feels staged. Every emotion could be false. That ambiguity adds depth to the narrative and keeps the audience questioning everything. This is not just a horror film. It is a meditation on identity and obsession. Beneath the surface, it asks a chilling question. How far will someone go to become someone else? Number 9, Frightmare, 1983. What begins as a story about an aging horror actor quickly transforms into something far more disturbing. This film follows a once famous performer known for playing a cinematic killer who now struggles with fading relevance. When a group of young filmmakers invites him to recreate his past glory, everything starts to unravel. The boundary between fiction and reality begins to collapse in a way that feels deeply uncomfortable. The central idea is simple yet powerful. What happens when a man who has spent his life pretending to be a monster no longer knows how to stop? The film explores obsession with identity and the fear of being forgotten. Fame becomes a trap rather than a reward. The actor is not just reliving his role, he is consumed by it. There is a strong psychological current running beneath the surface. Scenes shift between performance and reality without clear warning. This creates a sense of instability that mirrors the character's mental state. The audience is pulled into that confusion, which makes every moment unpredictable. The kills themselves are not excessive, but they carry weight because they feel personal. This is not random violence. It is driven by desperation and fractured identity. That makes it far more unsettling than typical slasher films of the era. In the end, this film stands as a reflection on horror itself. It asks whether the real terror lies in the mask or in the person who refuses to remove it. Number 8. Bloodbeat, 1982. Few films from the 80s feel as strange and dreamlike as this one. At its core, it tells the story of a young woman who begins experiencing visions of a supernatural samurai presence during the holiday season. What follows is a surreal blend of slasher elements and psychological horror that never fully explains itself. That ambiguity is exactly what makes it so haunting. The setting is deceptively calm. A quiet rural home covered in snow creates a peaceful atmosphere that slowly becomes unsettling. The contrast between domestic warmth and violent imagery builds tension in a subtle way. Nothing feels entirely real. Every moment carries a sense of distortion. The supernatural element is handled with unusual restraint. The samurai figure appears almost like a hallucination, yet its actions have real consequences. This creates a dual layer of horror. Is the threat external or internal? The film never gives a clear answer, which forces the audience to sit with uncertainty. Visually, the film leans into soft lighting and slow movement. Scenes unfold like fragments of a dream rather than a structured narrative. This gives it a hypnotic quality that separates it from more conventional horror films of its time. What makes this film endure is its willingness to be different. It does not follow rules. It does not provide comfort. It simply invites you into a world where logic fades and fear takes on a more abstract form. Number 7. Mausoleum, 1983. There is something deeply unsettling about horror that comes from within rather than from an external threat. This film builds its entire narrative around that idea. It follows a woman who becomes possessed by a demonic force tied to her family lineage. What begins as subtle behavioral changes soon escalates into violent transformations that feel both shocking and tragic. The film wastes little time establishing its tone. From the opening moments, there is a sense that something ancient is waiting beneath the surface. This is not a random possession story. It is rooted in generational curse and inherited darkness. That concept adds weight to the horror because it suggests inevitability. The physical effects play a major role in creating fear. Transformations are exaggerated yet effective. They capture the raw energy of 80s practical effects while maintaining a sense of unpredictability. The body becomes a battleground where identity is slowly erased. Beyond the visuals, there is a psychological dimension that gives the story depth. The central character is not simply a victim. She is caught between awareness and loss of control. This internal struggle creates tension that extends beyond the moments of violence. The film also explores themes of repression and hidden desire. The demonic presence does not just destroy, it amplifies what already exists beneath the surface. That makes the horror feel personal rather than distant. In the end, this is more than a possession film. It is a story about losing oneself to something that was always there waiting. Number 6. Pieces, 1982. Several films from the early 80s embrace chaos as completely as this one. What begins as a simple murder mystery quickly spirals into something far more unpredictable. Set on a college campus, the story follows a series of brutal killings carried out by a mysterious attacker. Each victim is discovered in pieces, which gives the film its infamous identity. Yet the real shock comes from how wildly the narrative shifts between tones. At first, it feels like a straightforward slasher. Then it suddenly becomes surreal. Characters behave in unexpected ways. Scenes unfold with a strange rhythm that feels almost disconnected from logic. This unpredictability is not a flaw. It becomes the film's defining feature. The audience is never allowed to settle into comfort because the film refuses to follow a clear path. The violence is direct and unapologetic. Practical effects are used in a way that emphasizes shock rather than realism. Every attack feels exaggerated yet effective. The film does not aim for subtlety. It wants to provoke a reaction, and it succeeds. There's also a strange sense of dark humor running beneath the surface. Certain moments feel intentionally absurd, which creates a contrast with the brutality. This combination of tones makes the experience feel unique even within a crowded genre. What ultimately makes this film endure is its fearless approach. It does not try to be polished. It does not try to be safe. Instead, it embraces its own madness completely. That raw energy gives it a cult status that continues to grow with time. This is not a film you simply watch. It is something you experience in all its chaotic intensity. Number 5, Hell Night, 1981. There is a certain kind of horror that thrives on anticipation rather than constant action. This film understands that principle perfectly. It places its characters inside an abandoned mansion as part of a college initiation ritual. What begins as a challenge quickly becomes a nightmare when they realize the stories about the house may not be fiction at all. The strength of the film lies in its atmosphere. The mansion feels alive with history. Every hallway carries echoes of past violence. Every room hides something that should have remained forgotten. The setting is not just a backdrop. It becomes the central source of tension as the characters explore deeper into its darkness. Unlike many films of its time, this one takes a slower approach. It allows suspense to build gradually. The audience is given time to absorb the environment. This makes every sudden moment of danger feel more intense. When the threat finally reveals itself, it feels earned rather than forced. The characters are given enough depth to make their fear believable. They are not just victims waiting for their turn. They react to the situation in ways that feel grounded, which adds to the realism of the experience. There is also an underlying theme of confronting the past. The house represents unresolved violence that refuses to stay buried. The characters are not just facing a physical threat. They are stepping into a history that continues to linger. In the end, this film proves that horror does not need constant movement to be effective. Sometimes, the quiet moments are the most terrifying. Number 4, Basket Case, 1982. At first glance, the premise seems almost absurd. A young man arrives in the city carrying a basket that hides something alive inside. But what unfolds is far more complex than a simple creature feature. This film blends body horror with emotional tragedy in a way that feels both unsettling and strangely human. The story revolves around a pair of conjoined twins who were separated against their will. One brother appears physically normal, while the other is hidden from the world. Their bond remains unbroken despite the separation. Together, they begin a path of revenge against those responsible for their suffering. The film uses its low-budget limitations creatively. The creature design is crude yet effective because it carries emotional weight. It is not just a monster. It represents abandonment and anger. This transforms the violence into something more personal. There is a raw energy throughout the film that reflects the underground filmmaking scene of its time. Scenes feel unpredictable. The tone shifts between horror and dark humor without warning. This gives the film a unique identity that separates it from more polished productions. Beyond the surface, there is a deeper exploration of isolation and dependence. The relationship between the brothers is both sympathetic and disturbing. It raises questions about identity and connection that linger after the film ends. This is not simply a story about revenge. It is a story about what happens when something essential is taken away and cannot be restored. Number 3. Demons, 1985. There is a special kind of horror that traps its characters in a space where escape becomes impossible. This film embraces that idea with relentless intensity. A group of strangers gathers inside a movie theater to watch a mysterious film. What begins as entertainment quickly turns into a nightmare when the events on screen begin to bleed into reality. The audience is no longer watching horror, they are living it. The setting is crucial to the experience. The theater becomes a sealed environment where fear spreads like an infection. Doors close, windows become unreachable, panic builds as the situation spirals out of control. This sense of confinement creates a pressure that never fully releases. Every moment feels like it is pushing toward inevitable collapse. The transformation sequences are among the most memorable aspects of the film. Practical effects are used with striking creativity. The process of turning from human to demon feels violent and irreversible. It is not just physical change, it represents the loss of identity. Once the transformation begins, there is no return. There is also an underlying commentary about consumption of horror itself. The characters come to watch violence for entertainment. Instead, they become part of it. This blurring of boundaries adds a meta layer that makes the experience more unsettling. It forces the audience to question their own role as viewers. The pacing is relentless once the chaos begins. Scenes escalate quickly. The film does not pause to explain. It moves forward with raw energy that mirrors the spreading infection within the theater. This creates a sense of urgency that keeps tension high from beginning to end. In the end, this is not just a creature feature. It is a contained nightmare where fear multiplies and escape disappears completely. Number 2. The Slumber Party Massacre 2, 1987. Some horror films follow rules. This one tears them apart and replaces them with something far more chaotic. What begins as a typical slasher setup quickly transforms into a surreal nightmare that feels closer to a fever dream than a conventional story. A group of young women gathers for a quiet weekend. Instead, they find themselves trapped inside a reality that begins to fracture in disturbing ways. The killer is not just a physical threat. He is a manifestation of fear and desire blended together. Appearing as a rockabilly driller with a guitar weapon, he feels less like a person and more like an invading presence from another dimension. His existence blurs the line between dream and reality. That ambiguity is what gives the film its unique identity. Unlike its predecessor, this film leans heavily into psychological horror. The violence is stylized yet unsettling because it is tied directly to the mental state of the central character. Nightmares bleed into waking moments. Music becomes part of the terror. Scenes shift without warning, which creates a constant sense of instability. Visually, the film embraces bold colors and exaggerated imagery. It does not aim for realism. It aims for emotional impact. Every sequence feels heightened, as if the world itself is bending under pressure. This creates an atmosphere where nothing can be trusted. There is also a deeper theme running beneath the surface. The film explores anxiety surrounding identity and control. The protagonist is not just fighting an external force. She is struggling with something internal that refuses to stay hidden. That psychological layer transforms the story into something more complex than a simple slasher. In the end, this film stands as one of the strangest entries of its era. It refuses to play safe. It embraces its own madness completely. And because of that, it becomes unforgettable in ways most horror films never achieve. Number 1. Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, 1986. Some films disturb not because of what they show, but because of how real they feel. This is one of those films. It does not rely on supernatural elements or elaborate setups. Instead, it presents violence in a way that feels grounded and unsettling. The story follows a drifter who moves through life, committing acts that feel random yet deeply calculated. There is no grand motive. There is only the quiet presence of danger. What makes this film so effective is its restraint. It does not sensationalize its subject. The violence is presented in a detached manner that removes any sense of spectacle. This creates discomfort because it feels closer to reality than traditional horror. There is no dramatic music guiding emotions. There is only silence and consequence. The performances add to this sense of realism. The central character is not exaggerated. He is calm, observant, almost ordinary. That normality makes his actions more disturbing. It suggests that horror does not always appear in obvious forms. Sometimes it hides in plain sight. The film also explores the idea of desensitization. Characters react to violence in ways that feel disturbingly casual. This reflects a deeper commentary on how repeated exposure can erode empathy. The audience is forced to confront their own reactions as the story unfolds. Structurally, the film avoids traditional narrative comfort. It does not build toward a clear resolution. It presents a series of events that feel fragmented yet connected by a growing sense of inevitability. This lack of closure leaves a lasting impression. In the end, this is not just a horror film. It is an experience that lingers. It challenges the viewer to sit with discomfort and recognize that the most terrifying stories are often the ones that feel possible. These forgotten films are not polished or predictable. They are raw, strange, unsettling. Each one captures a different side of 80s horror that mainstream cinema often ignored. If you are searching for something rare and unforgettable, these are the films that still carry that dangerous edge today.